might not be able to tell from the outside, but the 5th generation M3 represents a big change for BMW. It's the engine. Where high-revving, naturally aspirated engines have characterized the M3 since the 80s, the straight-six powering this 2015 M3 has not one, but 2 turbos hanging off its side. Claimed horsepower increases by 11 to 425, but torque makes a huge jump to 406 pound-feet, an increase of over 100 pound-feet, and it arrives much sooner. What's more promising is that despite being bigger in every dimension than the car it replaces, BMW says this M3 is lighter than last generation and significantly stiffer, which will improve handling and steering feel. Driving the M3 was a very exciting prospect, so you can imagine our disappointment when we arrived at a wet and very rainy Road America. It's a fantastic course, just over 4 miles, spread over 14 turns and 2 straights, where the M3 can get close to its electronically limited 155-mile-an-hour top speed. For our introduction of the new M3, we went to Road America for the press launch, and it's been wet all morning. And it's been interesting. You might think that's bad, but you know, you make lemonade out of lemons. It's actually been a really good way to learn the car, to learn the differences between this and the E90, the previous generation M3. And the one that jumps out is power. This thing makes over 100 pound-feet of torque more than the last M3's V8. And you feel that instantly. The torque comes on so quickly and so strongly that you really have to anticipate it, especially if you're in the wet. The last M3 made, what, 295 pound-feet at 4,000 RPM? This is a completely different animal than that. And if you drive this car expecting that kind of power delivery, you're gonna get pretty sideways. You have to relearn how to drive this car, much like you had to relearn driving the M5 when it got turbocharged. And in a way, that's a good segue, because my initial impression from driving this car in the wet is that it feels kind of like a small M5. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. Most specifically, it's partly because this car uses the M5's differential. It uses the M5's transmission. Even the gear ratios are the same. And the rear subframe gives you the same sensation that that car does. And I think there's a pro shoe behind us, definitely. We just got dive bombed by a BMW professional driver. Anyway, so M3, M5. So I think two of the reasons why this car gives me the similar feeling as an M5 is because it uses the same twin clutch transmission and it uses the same differential. There's also similar philosophies in the rear end. The rear end is very stiff. The subframe is bolted directly to the chassis like it is in the M5. And the result is that they feel kind of similar. Now what you also notice is that despite this engine having 2 turbochargers hanging off of it, there's a lot of noise in this cabin. It makes a surprising, or it makes a remarkable amount of interior noise, engine noise. The downside is it doesn't sound as good as the E90's V8. And that's just something you're going to run into when you're comparing a 8,000, 9,000 RPM V8 with a twin-turbo 6-cylinder. That said, this thing does rev out nicely, and it has a very broad power band. BMW stressed the fact that they've stiffened this chassis quite a bit, and I never doubt what the car's doing. It feels consistent, it feels controllable, it feels communicative. It feels like all the things you'd hope an M3 would feel like. The newfound power has made a big and welcome impact on the way the M3 drives, but we wanted to see the size of that effect. Once the M3 was back in Los Angeles, we took it to K&N Engineering and put it on the dyno. The result? 379 horsepower at 6,600 RPM and 378 pound-feet of torque at 4,300 RPM. But peak numbers are less important than the shape of the curve. Look how quickly torque spikes when you press the throttle, and look how consistent the power delivery remains. For comparison, we also brought along an E92 M3. Now look at the area under the curve. The difference is that big. BMW launch control hasn't been the greatest as of yet, especially in the M5. In this car, it's better, but still not great. To activate it, you turn off stability control and traction control. You select manual mode on the shifter. You make sure it's in the harshest shift setting. And if you want to do a big burnout, you hold the brake, press the gas, and that's how the BMW recommends you use launch control. In our testing, we actually found it slightly faster to not hold the brake and just stab the throttle. Like that. Minimal wheel spin and a faster 0 to 60 time versus what BMW recommends, 3.9 seconds to 60. Quarter mile, low 12s, nearly 120 miles an hour. Not quite there, but very fast. We have the optional big carbon ceramic rotors, 19-inch wheels, and combined they should produce very short stopping distances. Our best stop from 60 took just 99 feet. Finally, limit handling in the M3 in the dry. What I really like about this chassis is that it's flexible. Okay, M3 is good. M3 gets the stamp of approval. You know, most cars, when you get into a big oversteer situation, that's the only thing the car is going to do, and you're not going to be able to control it, get yourself out of it and fix it. And this, through the steering, through your throttle and brake inputs, you can very much control the line of the car and do some pretty big smoky drifts. Or drive through a course fast. A lot of accuracy and feedback in the steering, a lot of feedback in the chassis too. As I get pretty stuck there for a second. This is the M3 we've been asking for. The road and tire noise are loud, the ride is firm, but this is all done because it makes the car drive better. The steering is fantastic. The feel of the chassis and the responses it gives back to you make you want to drive the car harder. While the engine doesn't have the theatrics of previous M3s, its power delivery more than makes up for it. This is every bit the driver's car we hoped it would be.